Yeah, I would say yeah, 8-10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Do I start now or?
Yeah. We're all ready. Yeah.
2 fois 8 minutes, avec une pause au milieu. Ah, okay. Okay, if you're sitting comfortably, I'll begin. That, by the way, is a cultural reference, but you wouldn't get it because you're too young.
I didn't hear it.
If you're sitting comfortably, I'll begin. It was a children's program back when I was a kid. And they start by saying, "Children, are you sitting comfortably?" Then I'll begin.
Yeah,
And people my age will quote that, you see, because that's what we do.
you have to do it with the right accent, though.
That's right. Anyway, comfortably, and then I'll begin English received pronunciation. Right, sorry. I've been asked by Federica to speak to you about refugees and asylum seekers and all things related to asylum and migrations of populations. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I've done a lot of work in that field since I've been in Belgium, which is now 25 years, going on 26. I will try and speak at a reasonable pace, but I'm not very good at that, so I'm not doing it on purpose. I apologise. Just who I am. I am a member, and have been a member all my adult life, in fact, of a charity called the St Vincent de Paul Society, which is a Catholic charity. And I joined it when I was actually at interpreting school in Bath in the UK, when I was in my early 30s. And then when I came to Belgium, I wanted to be active in charitable work again, and so I joined a St Vincent de Paul group in Brussels, in Ixelles in fact. And one day we were having a big meeting for all the Francophone Vincentians, that's what they call people who are members of this society, this Catholic society, and we were looking at what the French call les nouvelles pauvretés, the new poverties, and trying to work out, how we could help people, what was happening in society, what were the new challenges for people who wanted to raise people out of poverty and reduce suffering, which is what we're after. And it turned out that lots and lots of groups throughout the country were being faced with a phenomenon which was quite new, which was that of refugees and asylum seekers. This was back in the late 80s when I arrived in Belgium, probably around 1990 it must have been, so it was shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which of course meant that the lock gates were opened, the floodgates were opened, and people were able to flow into Western Europe who before had been hidden behind the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall. So we decided back in this meeting, which was in Namur, to create a group that would specialise in refugees and asylum seekers and how best to help them and get to know their problems and their difficulties. And because I just arrived in Belgium, I hadn't got much on my plate in those days, unlike these days, and so I volunteered to be a member of this group, and in fact I ended up being its chairman, stroke president, stroke coordinator, stroke moderator. And so for a number of years, between 1990 and 1997, I headed up this group of about 10 volunteers who would go out and meet asylum seekers and refugees and migrants, try and work out what their specific problems were, and then try and help them. Now, before I go any further, the second part of my speech after the break will be about the refugee social and legal service that I created in 1997, which is why I referred earlier to that date. But let me talk to you first about the phenomenon of migration and asylum seekers. It's probably best to start with a bit of vocabulary, because the terminology which is used in this field is very vague and very inconsistent, which actually, I have to admit, is one of the goals of politicians. You have to understand that in today's world, and increasingly in the last 4 or 5 years since the financial crisis hit Western Europe, there were no votes, in fact, if you're a politician, in supporting foreigners. Foreigners are very much ridiculed and mistrusted. People think they come and steal their jobs. It's a huge debate in society and has been ever since I've been active in the field. And these days, because money is scarce, no politician really these days is going to say, vote for me and I'll let in 100,000 new asylum seekers. I mean, they certainly wouldn't get any votes. Everybody would laugh them out of court. And when you've got the rise, for example, of Nigel Farage's party in the UK, UKIP, you've got the rise of the far right in France, in Holland, in Germany, virtually all countries these days, the far right is rising, and it's rising on the back of a platform based on hatred and mistrust of foreigners. It's as simple as that. Now, I should point out that the reasoning and the spirituality behind the charity that I'm a part of is Christian, because I'm a Christian, and it's derived from a passage at the end of St. Matthew's Gospel, where God divides at the end of time. It's an eschatological story about the eschaton, the end of history, which is Greek, by the way. And God divides the sheep from the goats, which is where you get the phrase from in English, dividing the sheep from the goats. And on one side, he speaks to people who have not been of assistance to the poor, or the foreigner, or the migrant, or the prisoner, people who are hungry, people who are thirsty. They saw them and ignored them. And they are consigned to everlasting hellfire in the story. And on the other side, there are people who actually saw these same people who were suffering, who were foreign in a foreign land, and who assisted them. And they are given places in heaven. So that's the basic story. Now, I had, before opening this lengthy parenthesis, decided to talk to you about vocabulary. So I will do that now. You should know that a refugee is a very specific term. A refugee is not somebody who is seeking asylum or somebody who has gone abroad. A refugee is somebody who has been granted refugee status by the UN or by a country operating under the aegis of the Geneva Conventions, which define the circumstances in which an asylum seeker can be recognised as a refugee, which means that refugees, in fact, are a very select band of people who have come to a third country seeking asylum and have been granted asylum. Until they become refugees, they are asylum seekers. That is assuming they have asked for asylum. Now, in Belgium, the particular drama is that 90% of foreigners coming into the country fleeing either persecution or poverty or drought or war, they don't apply for asylum, because such is the draconian fashion in which the Belgian state applied the Geneva Conventions, and the Belgian state is not alone in this, I should say. I'm not pointing out Belgium in particular, that very few people actually are granted asylum. It's about 8% of all those who request asylum, who are themselves 10% of all the foreigners flooding into the country. These figures are pretty much valid for the UK, for France, for Belgium. They're pretty much constant in Western Europe. So those are refugees and asylum seekers. Migrants are simply people who leave their country and migrate to another country, usually for economic reasons. That's why in the English red tops, the popular papers, you will find references to bogus asylum seekers or economic migrants. Now, an economic migrant is usually categorised as somebody who has left his or her country seeking a better life. Now, I personally think that's a basic human right, but no Western European government will agree with me. So I'm just being utopian in that and naive. Then, of course, we have displaced persons. Now, as you probably know, a displaced person has not left his or her home country. These people are displaced within their borders, which is why they're referred to as IDPs. IDPs being internally displaced persons. And why in booth 6 will you not write that down? IDP, write it down. Thank you. Good. Sorry. So IDPs are people who are displaced internally, and those are the huge majority of people who flee war, famine, drought and persecution. For example, in the Congo, there are tens of thousands of IDPs. In Tanzania, there are tens of thousands of IDPs as well. And the brunt of the burden of trying to look after people who have fled their homes usually is taken by the country concerned, but somewhere else in that country. They'll run away from a hotspot, from an area of fighting, and try and find refuge somewhere else within the country. I see my 8 minutes are up, so I better stop now for the pause. Is that correct? Stop. Thank you. Was I slow?
Okay.
Okay. I thought I was slow.